and to nurture this precious life. Before we begin, I'm going to invite everyone to go ahead and just clasp your hands. Well, clasp your hands again. Clasp them one more time. Now stop and take a look at your hands, how they feel together. Look and see which thumb is on top. Now rotate your hands so the opposite thumb is on top. How does that feel?
Weird.
Yes, good. If it's uncomfortable, that's just what we need. Clasp them again so that that weird hand is on top now. And do it again. One more time. And the more that we do this, the more comfortable it will become. And sometimes these things can become acceptable. I'm going to ask you to accept getting uncomfortable today. Because successful people get uncomfortable. Successful people create solutions. A wise teacher once told me that what becomes acceptable becomes inevitable. How many of you have heard that before? Yeah? If we accept having less, we get less. If we go out and buy larger clothes, we accept more pounds on our body and are less motivated to get rid of them. If we accept being oppressed, we become oppressed. What becomes acceptable becomes inevitable. We make it the standard. And curious, maybe there is something to learn in that. In fact, I'm going to get you guys to participate with me. Whenever I say curious, maybe there is something to learn here, I'm going to ask you to sing, "We Didn't Start the Fire." Could you try that for me? We didn't start the fire. Good, good. Just that way I keep your attention the whole entire time. Now, in the cartoon that you see on the screen, I found that I was the character holding the hose. But I lived in the house that was on fire. It didn't quite make sense. When did that become acceptable? I'm not sure, but it is inevitable that the burning house will go down to the ground if I don't aim my hose at it. And it'll probably bring down the property value of the homes in my neighborhood. Just because I didn't douse the flames. In Billy Joel's song, "We Didn't Start the Fire," he's singing about many important and trivial events in history that occurred from his birth in 1949 until the time the song was written in 1989. We may not remember the words, but we all know the chorus. We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, though we didn't light it, we tried to fight it, right? And we are at a time in our country right now where people are speaking out against brutality and injustice. Yet, we find some choose to argue over what to call this movement. Even still, there may be some who choose to argue over and criticize what the wife of Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York City, she wore to a funeral, instead of showing respect to the slain police officer and his family. We didn't start the fire, but we have choices as to whether we pour gasoline or water on it. I have a story for you. I was about 6 or 7 years old when this happened. Sunday afternoons in Waverly, Tennessee, that was a time for friends, neighbors, and family to call and visit. On this particular day, one of the visitors was my big, tall Uncle Alan. He's muscular and built straight out of the Army. Also, my cousin Tanisha was there. So we kids, my cousin Tanisha, my older sister, and I, we go and play school in the bedroom while the adults talk. My sister's older than me, and she says, "Okay, I'm going to be the professor of math." She takes out a chalkboard and she starts showing her multiplication tables and division. I was really impressed. My cousin Tanisha says, "Well, I'll be the teacher of art, so let's everyone take time to draw." And I was really impressed that she could draw so well. Here I am at 6 or 7 years old going, what am I going to teach? And I said, I'll be the teacher of science. Let me show you what I can do. I run out, get a pan and put toilet paper in it. I then light it on fire. And then proceeded to freak out when the flames got higher and I couldn't deal with them. I threw them out in the hallway, screaming. Uncle Alan comes storming down the hall, stomps out the flames, and then proceeds to administer corporal punishment. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I could have chosen to learn a couple of things that day, like perhaps there are consequences for my actions. But instead, I chose to learn that Uncle Alan's not my favorite uncle anymore. And I'm not that fond of the military either. But today I recognize that me being a know-it-all can be dangerous to myself and those around me if I really don't know what I'm doing. My insecurities and feelings of inadequacy can lead me to do things that aren't of a benefit to anyone. Curious, maybe there's a lesson here? We've been set fire. Now let's fast forward to the day before Halloween of last year. My husband and I have lived in the same quiet neighborhood, mixed families, for over 3 years. Nothing ever happens. On that morning, we were awakened at 4 a.m. to our neighbors screaming, "Fire!" We rushed outside to see orange flames rising with black, thick smoke billowing into the sky. We were there with all of our neighbors on the yard, grieving one collected sigh of "Someone please put out the flames." And please don't let that be my car. The fire had started in our carport behind the apartments. I thought it must have been arson. What else would have started a fire on a cold autumn morning? How dare someone do this to us? How dare someone make me feel unsafe in my own home? I was suspicious of everyone for the rest of the day. When I went to move my car several hours after the fire, some lady across the yard was throwing a crazy tantrum. She was hurling things out of the windows while yelling at someone. Her refrigerator was on the lawn. She threw a Hello Kitty crock pot that almost hit me. I thought, this lady must have caused the fire. She's insane. When the custodian came to tell her to stop, she yelled at him saying, "It's your fault. You did this. You caused this to happen." She was blaming him. I was blaming her. Eventually, the cops were called to subdue her in my safe neighborhood. In all this chaos, I blamed her. Coming to find out, she was one of the people whose cars were burned completely down to the metal. I had just gotten away with some charred taillights. In our case, this fire was an equalizer. She was white and disadvantaged, without a method of transportation and hampered livelihood. I had privilege. I had a car to get me around. Sure, I couldn't afford to repair the damages right now. It wasn't covered by my insurance. It's an old car. But I didn't have to live without a car. Yet, I could afford to judge my neighbor and make assumptions as to how she dealt with this tragedy. It sounds familiar. There are some who sat in their armchairs and judged an entire community in Ferguson, Missouri, for rioting after they had seen an 18-year-old young man who was gunned down by someone who was sworn to serve and protect them. Curious. Maybe there is a lesson here. We didn't start the fire. Ladies and gentlemen, I was wrong. In my moment of fear for my own safety and my own loss, I had judged my neighbor. I judged someone that I didn't know because upon their reaction to a painful situation, to a trauma. That's when I knew I had to get uncomfortable. Just as our principle of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning demands of us Unitarian Universalists. To get over my fear of the fire, I forced myself to walk through our carport and to stare at the charred remains of vehicles. I took in how a thin concrete wall gave me privilege and protected my car, whereas others were burned completely down. I wanted to run from the scene. I was trying to avoid walking and seeing it. But I had to stand there and face the fact it was true, and that it happened, and we're still rebuilding today. Then I had to look and see what was really happening to my house that was on fire. It was there that I learned that in every 28 hours, a person of color is killed by a police officer. When did this become acceptable? I learned about the bombing of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma during the race riots of 1921. Blacks had created a thriving, contributing society in Greenwood that was destroyed in the first air raids on U.S. soil. This event was kept from our history books until an Oklahoma state legislative action in 1996. Just 18 years ago. I had to look further and learn about Bacon's Rebellion, where at one time we all worked together. Previously, indentured whites and freed blacks rose up against the elite and attempted to burn the colony of Jamestown, Virginia in 1676, when they were not given protection from attacks by the Native Americans on the frontiers. It was then that we were divided. Human judgment, along with the promise of privilege, were used against all of us. That was when a classification of race was created in America. And the slave trade began, kicking off centuries of degradation, denial of a history, intolerance, and judgment in my beautiful country. Our principles of the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person, demand that we as UUs all seek justice for our neighbor whose house is on fire. Of course, all lives matter, but our African American brothers and sisters right now are not being shown this. Ladies and gentlemen, I call upon you to honor our principle of acceptance of one another and encouragement in spiritual growth. In this case, the spiritual growth means checking our privilege and being gentle with ourselves in the process. I'd love to tell you that I've reached out to my neighbor, that I offered her the use of my car. I haven't. I'm not a saint, and I'm wrong. I have wounds that I have to heal, and there is a long way to go. But I can get uncomfortable, just enough to at least ask her if she would like to share her story and what is happening with her. Some of the changes we will need in this beautiful nation of ours will require our usage of the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our society. Every voice matters. When we truly have respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part, we will have seen how the struggle and advances of our neighbors impacts and benefits us. Take a moment right now to look at a neighbor sitting next to you here in this church right now. Do it. Hold them with your gaze. Stare into their eyes. Recognize that your neighbor has been burned by prejudice, judgments, poverty, sexism, racism, or religious oppression. When he or she is burning, you may get scorched. Is that acceptable? Keep looking at your neighbor. And if you don't have a neighbor, go find one. I'm serious. Take that moment right now. We're friends. We're not going to bite each other. Stay with your neighbor in this. Recognize that he or she is a person with their own hopes, dignity, goals, dreams, passions, and a future. Yeah, hold on to that gaze. I see you. We are all connected. Ladies and gentlemen, we didn't start the fire. We didn't light it. Let's get uncomfortable and let's do what it takes to fight it. As the Ink Spots once sang in an early 1940s song, I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. Thank you.